Welcome to Chapter 3, Barriers to Intercultural Communication. Items that we're going to highlight include uncertainty reduction theory, anxiety, assuming similarities instead of differences, ethnocentrism, what it is, how we define it, and then lastly, we'll be looking at prejudices and stereotyping. So, the theory of uncertainty reduction assumes that during the initial phase of interaction with another person, your primary communication goal is to reduce your uncertainty about that person. Okay? So you're attempting to discover information about the other person and then reveal information about yourself. You want to reduce any uncertainty about that person to see if you can connect, to find out who he or she is, and reveal information about yourself to see if you can find some kind of bridge in order to communicate. Uncertainty reduction theory. Anxiety. You're anxious. You fear the unknown when you're communicating. So when you're anxious because you don't know what to expect, that could be a barrier. That could be a barrier in communication. Think about your first day on a job, okay? A new job. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what the people are like. This is what, or maybe your first day on a college campus. Think about that. This is the type of anxiety. It's the unknown. And sometimes when we have too much anxiety, high anxiety, it limits our interactions with others. So it could be very similar in an intercultural context, a different cultural context. Assuming similarity instead of differences. Okay, you could be caught unaware of the important differences of another culture when you assume that you're similar. Okay, each culture is different in some degree. Be aware that when you assume differences can be a barrier as well, leading not to recognizing what you have in common that is similar. So, believe it or not, the best thing to do is not to assume anything. Don't assume that you're totally different with this culture or that you are the same. Let me give you this example. In 1997, a Danish woman left her child in a stroller in front of a New York City Manhattan diner. So just envision there's a diner in downtown Manhattan, and she left her baby in the stroller in front of the diner and went in to have breakfast. Okay? Other diners became concerned. They called the cops. The woman was arrested, and she lost her child to foster care. This is a Danish woman. She assumed that the cultures were similar because in her culture, it's very common in a Danish community to leave your child in a stroller outside of a restaurant. So she felt this was perfectly fine. And actually, what happened was that she hired a lawyer. The lawyer proved that in the town of Copenhagen, where she was from, that this is a very common, accepted type of procedure for mothers to leave their child in a stroller outside of a diner. And the woman did get her baby back. She did not lose her child. So it's better to assume nothing, that you're not in common or not the same or not different. But you know what? The very best thing to do is just to ask, what are your customs here? What are your customs here? And then you know what the customs are for that particular culture. Ethnocentrism, a term that you hear frequently, it's when you negatively judge the aspects of another culture by the standards of your own because you think your culture is superior. So you judge another culture and you feel or think that it is not superior. Click on the YouTube video that explains ethnocentrism, and that will offer you a good definition, a good example of what this scenario is. Just to add to this, extreme ethnocentrism leads to rejection of the richness and knowledge of other cultures, as we know, because you're so narrow-minded, you block out others. It blocks the exchange of ideas and skills among people because you don't communicate with them if you are ethnocentric, where you feel that your culture is superior to another culture, and you judge that culture based on the fact that you feel that your culture is superior. Stereotyping and prejudice. You make judgments based on one's group membership, okay? Based on one group membership. And prejudice refers to the irrational suspicion or hatred, irrational, and I want to emphasize that, of a particular group, race, religion, or sexual orientation. So looking at this as far as stereotyping and how this affects our communication, think about it. You may stereotype because someone rides a Harley or drives a Harley. You may stereotype because someone's an older American. So you met someone who was an older American and he or she was a very slow driver. So you just say all older Americans are slow drivers. So that's stereotyping. Now, there's something to be aware of as far as cultural sensitivity, okay? To be aware of a culture's customs, okay? So within a culture, there's a particular custom. For instance, I was told by a student who was from Mexico, and she said, when I have a birthday party, I don't tell people to come to the birthday party at 2 o'clock and they must leave by 4 o'clock. A very common standard custom in America where you invite, for instance, if it's a child's birthday party, you say the party's from 2 to 4 p.m., see you then, okay? That is not acceptable. And anybody can come. There's not a set list of folks who will come to this particular party. So in a sense, that's saying you're culturally sensitive to this particular custom in this culture. But also be aware that not everybody follows that, okay? You don't want to stereotype and say that, okay, all Mexican Americans follow this particular custom. For instance, your textbook looked at American Airlines. And when American Airlines started to fly into Latin America, they put in their manual that Latin American customers like to drink before taking off. And also that Latin Americans do not expect flights to depart on time. Okay? Their concept of time within a culture. So this was put in the manual. Was this cultural sensitivity or was it stereotyping, saying that all Latin Americans like to drink before they take off? Okay? Also with stereotyping, to be aware of profiling. Law enforcement individuals practice the scrutiny of individuals for believed likelihood of criminal behavior by looking at a profile of one and saying that this person fits this particular stereotype of being a terrorist or being a stalker. So again, to be aware of how you make these judgments within or of another culture, of folks within that culture. And as we know, prejudice refers to irrational suspicion or hatred of a particular groups. We just don't tolerate prejudice. I do want to go back to stereotyping too. We could have or say things that are in a sense good stereotypes, like the French are all good cooks. Okay, really? You think every person from France is a good cook? But when we make that statement, in a sense, we're stereotyping. We look at doctors or physicians and we say they're intelligent and they're wise. Okay, every single doctor, every single physician. So be concerned with if you're stereotyping or putting or using cultural sensitivity. The negative effects, as you can see, they assume that we have a widely held belief that is true, then it may not be. If you continue to stereotype, it reinforces your belief. And unfortunately, sometimes we share those beliefs. So you do want to stop it if you are finding that you are stereotyping. And it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy for the person who is stereotyped. In other words, you can have a self-fulfilling prophecy is when you set that expectation. Usually for yourself, I'm going to do well on this, I'm going to study, most likely you will. Or you can direct it on another person and say that this person is A, B, and C. Well, guess what? That person is going to start to think that they are A, B, and C. So be wary of that and just don't start stereotyping in a negative effect to begin with, or even in a positive effect. Consider every person in that group as an individual. As we mentioned before, prejudice is the irrational dislike, authoritarian personality. The highly prejudiced person tends to overgeneralize and see people in bipolar terms. Folks who have this authoritarian personality tend to see people in black and white, bipolar terms. Folks are usually highly conventional and are uncritical of higher authority and unlikely to change their. So again, folks who are highly prejudiced fall into this authoritarian personality. They tend to overgeneralize, see people in bipolar terms. These folks tend to be highly conventional and uncritical of higher authority of themselves. So just to review our PowerPoint, what we went over barriers of communication, of intercultural communication. We looked at uncertainty reduction theory. We looked at other barriers, roadblocks that come up, include anxiety. You assume that you're similar instead of different, or you could assume that you're different. Remember, we want to assume nothing. We want to ask, what is your custom? Ethnocentrism, believing that your culture is superior and you make judgment on other cultures based on your thought that your culture is superior. You stereotype and you have prejudice, which will, in a sense, most likely produce barriers in many different ways other than intercultural communication. Thank you.